Right, so with me today, I have the wonderful Violet Fenn. Violet is the author of A History of the Vampire in Popular Culture, as well as Sex and Sexuality in Victorian Britain. And it's the Regency one that's out next, isn't it?
Yeah, Secrets and Scandals in Regency Britain with the best, I'll say it myself, the best subheader ever, Sex, Drugs and Proxy Rule. Which I wanted as the main title. I had to really argue, but I got it on the sub, so that was enough. But yeah, that comes out at the end of this month, 28th of February, that comes out.
Excellent stuff. Can't wait. Violet, so you're currently writing non-fiction, but you've also written fiction. Is there a difference in the way you approach writing these two genres?
The method is the same. I was thinking about this earlier. The method is the same. The execution is different, I think is how I'd put it. I plot everything, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. I plot it because I find that easier. Partly that is because for those who don't know me, haven't met me or seen me before, I used to write for the metro.co.uk, the website version. I wrote for them for 3 years, and you learn to write at speed to a set sort of template. So you have to do it really. I was freelancing, so the more I wrote, the more I got paid. So what I learned there, and I've always carried this through, is that if I could get the start and the end, then the middle would sort itself out. You know, if you know how you're starting and you know how you're finishing, you can bodge the middle. I know that sounds unprofessional, but as long as you get the information in, people remember the start and the finish and the theme of what they're reading. So I plot everything, a basic outline. Whether it's, I use a thing called Scrivener, which people either love or hate, just because you can separate it out into chapters and stuff. And I have a section for each thing. With fiction, I know where I'm starting, I know roughly where I'm finishing and who will be involved, and I just see how it goes. So it's a bit of a mix. But because with fiction, I usually know in advance, I've got the idea of the characters or, the gist of the premise of the story. I tend to start writing that quite quickly. With non-fiction, the writing time is much, much shorter. I can write a full-length non-fiction book in 2 or 3 months, but I'll have done 6 months worth of research.
Yes.
So by the time I'm actually writing the book, it is almost stream of consciousness coming out of my head because I already know the stuff. So yeah, the method's the same. It's all plotted, and I do my beginning and my end.
That's a really meticulous approach, and I like that. Yeah, because my PhD was in sort of like plot and genre, and yeah, the whole structure just appeals to me on such a wonderful level. So yeah, what's your typical writing schedule then?
Oh, now I'm supposed to say, I sit here until I finish it, don't I? You know me, you know what I'm like of a day. I'll do anything to avoid what I'm meant to be doing. So what I do, I have a rule. If I've got anything on the go, it's easier when I've got an external deadline, because obviously you don't finish it by that time, you don't get paid, you've got to get it done. But I have to set myself deadlines. So what I generally do is I have a writing target for the day, whether I'm on a deadline or not. I'm actually quite meticulous in comparison to a lot of people, I suppose, because I work out per week how many words I need to get done in a week over the course of a period for a book or whatever. So that I don't always stick to it. Sometimes ahead, sometimes I'm way behind, but at least I know roughly not to panic, whether I'm in the right ballpark or not. So how I do it is I have a word count target per day. It's generally 1,000 words. I can write up to 3,000 or 4,000 if I really know what I'm doing and I've got it going and whatever. But I'm happy with 1,000, but I have been known to, if I feel stuck, I will drop it to 300, or a paragraph. It doesn't matter. There just has to be a target to start with, because as you know yourself, however stuck you feel, once you get going, generally you can keep going.
Yes.
So do you know what I mean? So if I think this isn't working, this is all awful, I'll do 300 words today, and it might all be crap, but at least I've done it. I'll usually then end up with 1,000, 1,500 or whatever, because I've got past that sticking point, but I have to do it. And how I do it is, however small the target is, that has to be done before everything else. So it doesn't matter whether the dogs need walking, or I've got accounts to do, or I've got to phone somebody for something. I do the writing first, because if I don't, as anyone knows me, knows I am very good at procrastinating. You know, so I have to make sure that is the thing that I do.
I know that you are a black belt at procrastinating, and yeah, but also that's what keeps my Facebook page so alive. All the stuff that you put on there helps me
and my woeing and wailing.
So yeah, sticking to my list here, what piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting out?
Just write. It's that simple. It doesn't matter anything. Just write anything. I have written everything over the years. Some of it's been paid work, some of it hasn't been, and some of it's just been for the joy of it. I have written everything. I've not turned an idea down or an offer down. I've done, and it's that thing of just being open to the idea of you can write. You know, you can write. Anybody who can string a sentence together can write. Whether you can do it well or not is up for other people to decide a lot of the time. But as long as you're happy with it, and just don't sit around waiting for a muse that might never turn up. You know, I think the best bit of advice I ever read was Stephen King and his On Writing, which obviously we all know incredibly well. It's like a Bible. And it's the one book I'd say for everybody to read, is On Writing by Stephen King. And the thing he said, which I thought was a really good point, is don't get into a habit that goes with your writing. You know, because he said a lot of people get into the idea of having a drink because they write better if they've had a drink, or,
yeah,
so you get, he said, what if you don't want to drink? What if you turn into an alcoholic because you feel like you can't, you know, write without the drink? So I try not to get into a habit of anything other than writing. Literally, you know, just sit down and write something. It doesn't matter. I wrote a fanzine when I was 23. I had no background in writing at that point. I just knew I wanted to do it. I'm 52 now. And just knew I wanted to do it. And generally, if you make the effort, somebody will appreciate it. Doesn't matter if it's one person, 100 people, 10,000 people, somebody will appreciate it. And people really like that little fanzine. This was in the days of sticking bits of paper together. You know, it wasn't even printed. It was just stuck and photocopied. So then I just had to go everything. I did a brief, weird little agony column for a magazine, online magazine, women's magazine, quite a well-known one. You know, I ended up writing for Metro. I've done also, I currently write a column about sexual history for the trade magazine for the UK adult industry. I write for sex shops, you know, and they're the most brilliant audience because they're really knowledgeable and they're interested. So it's yeah, don't channel yourself too tightly, and don't wait for a muse that isn't going to arrive. You are the muse. You've got to do it.
I mean, the point you made before from Stephen King, completely agree. I used to smoke, and one of the things that I would do before I actually started writing would be I needed to roll a cigarette, and it was almost part of a ritual to roll a cigarette, light it up, and then get the first one down whilst I was having that first cigarette. When I quit smoking, it was so difficult to actually write because I wasn't having that part of my ritual there. And yeah, it was one hell of a habit to get out of, really. Yeah,
it is. And I mean, I smoke like an absolute chimney. I'm not proud of it, but I love smoking. I'm sorry. So what I do is I don't smoke in the house, and my desk is in my bed. I'm sat in my bedroom. I've got a desk corner in it, and it's at the top of the house. I'm in a 3-story, so I have to go all the way down through the house out to the back garden if I want a cigarette. So I've also got the thing, an app called Freedom on my Mac, and you can set it to not let you into social media for 35 minutes at a time.
wow.
And yeah, but do you know what? It's amazing. Sometimes it's almost like a little breath of fresh air. You press the button, shuts everything down. If you really want to go and look, you can. I can still look on my phone if I really wanted to. But just not having it pinging up on my laptop makes a massive difference. And so I kind of set a habit to avoid getting trapped in the habits almost. You know, I do half an hour at a time and then think, right, I'll go make another cup of tea and I'll have a cigarette and whatever. And then I'll take the dogs out. And that's how I do it. But I don't tie anything into the writing because I can't, because if I risk then, if I lose the thing, you know, the tea brand or the cigarettes or the something, am I not going to be able to write again? So yeah, listen to Stephen King. He's a good granddaddy writer. He knows what he's talking about.
He does, yeah. Don't take his advice on how to walk by the side of a road, but yeah.
Don't ever go for a walk down the road with Stephen King. He's not very good at that, no.
Who do you read for pleasure?
Do you know what? Fantasy a lot. Urban fantasy stuff. I love Rivers of London, Ben Aronovich. And that's because I have issues sometimes with the bits of the writing and the way he says things and does things. But I do with everybody. Everybody does have issues with other people's writings. It's not that I think it's the most wonderful storylines. I think the characters are amazing, and the main character is the city. And that's what I like about it. The character, this London is the main character, and it goes into the history because, for obvious reasons, you know, I'm obsessed with history. It's mostly my job. I'm genuinely interested in it, and also historical non-fiction. I'm currently reading London Under by Peter Ackroyd. And it's all about everything that's under the streets in London. So it kind of ties into I actually bought it before I started reading Rivers of London years ago, but I've only just started sitting and reading it. And it's about everything that's underneath. I like this ties into fantasy writing. It's all bits that I squirrel away, you know, because it's about the hidden things and what's behind and what's below. And I'm fascinated by hidden worlds, you know, and that works in fiction as well as non-fiction, because a lot of this history I'm writing is about the hidden worlds behind the public, you know, view. So yeah, I like that. And I've just bought Piccadilly by Stephen Hoare, which is a history of the area. So it's London again, which is interesting because actually my favorite city is Liverpool, but London has such a history. You can't ignore it. You know, it's a character in itself, like I said. And so, yeah, I've just bought Piccadilly by Stephen Hoare, history of the area, and it's of how it's always been a pleasure seeker's sort of paradise. Oh. So that comes back to sexuality and history and things. So it all comes in to historical weird shit and sex.
Yeah, I can't think of anything better in life than
Basically, my life revolves around weird shit and sex history. So, you know, if that's not a bad career to have at my age, really.
It's not. Yeah, I think it's a career we should all have. Yeah, that's where everybody wants to be. But when you were talking about hidden worlds, I think obviously there's the crossover between the hidden worlds that you're researching, that you're reading for pleasure in fantasy, and sex is a hidden world to the majority of people because it's such a cool subject.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so fascinated about it, because it's a running joke that my favorite topics are sex and death, and it's true because they are the two things, and I've said this to everybody at some point, they're the two things that affect everybody, whether you like it or not. We're all going to die, and we're all a product of sex, even if it was done in a petri dish. The science is there. The science of sex is there. So it affects everybody, even if you pretend they don't exist. And they are and I think possibly because of that, they are the two topics that people are scared of. Which is why I love working in the adult retail industry, you know, because they have to be upfront about everything. They have to be open. They have to not be shocked by anything but they know their stuff, you know, so they're open about everything. And then when you get into writing about history of sexuality, especially as my first history book was Sex and Sexuality in Victorian Britain, there's that tendency to assume that if you don't see something written down, it didn't happen. You know, we go this thing about primary sources. So if it, you know, if it's written down, it must have happened. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Well, that's bullshit. You know, the context of the time is that in a lot of these periods, what we would consider within the realms of reasonable behavior between consenting people was absolutely illegal. You know, homosexuality could have got you the death penalty, and the last hanging for homosexuality was, I think, 1835. It's more recent than people think. And it, you know, it wasn't even commuted until the 1860s. And obviously, as we know, it was only made legal in this country over 21 in 1967, I think. And so it's a secret world, you know, and it's all a secret world. And a lot of this, it has more power than people realise. You know, it's not just a secret hobby between husbands and wives in the good old days or whatever, you know, or a fun thing to do now. It's a massive impulse in the human animal anyway, you know, so it ends up being this fantasy world, and when it's restricted, especially historically, you know, in the 1800s, people were still living their fantasy worlds behind. You know, you might not have seen, just because you didn't see it, and of course there's no records of it. They could have got hung. So you didn't write it down.
So yeah, that leads me on to one of the questions I've got here. So where do you do your research for non-fiction projects? Because this is obviously a difficult, with nothing being written down or very little being written down, it's got to be kind of difficult to do research like that.
Yeah, it is. It can be really difficult, actually. And sometimes I think, why the hell am I doing this job? And the answer to that is completely accidentally. I never set out to write history books. When I was writing for Metro, I was asked if I'd write, because they knew I would write about just about anything. And they asked if I'd write a series about historical sexuality. And I wrote one about the Victorians. There was talk about doing one about the royal sex lives in history. And they pulled it because they were worried about the royal lawyers were a bit litigious at the time, and I wasn't allowed. And I'd love to have done that. But off the back of that, I ended up being spotted by my current publishers who got me to write that. So that's another thing, going back to one of your earlier questions, is don't turn down any opportunities because you don't know where they're leading.
Yeah.
Because I didn't set out to write a history book. I'd always been writing fiction, and started doing this, you know, freelancing to pay the bills. And that's what led to me writing history books, just because I said yes to things. But but that ties in, because it was a bit of a shock, because I thought, well, I know some of this. I did history at school, you know, I've always been interested in it. I'd already got a lot of books about it anyway. So I kind of went in it a bit naively, thinking I should just be able to look all this up. It'll be fine. Immediately realised this thing that past, you know, only the last 100 years have people been daring to really write the truth down. Prior to that, a lot of it was scandal or hidden stuff. So firstly, don't trust Wikipedia. You know, that should be a general rule in life. However, people knock it. And what I will say is it is a really good resource for getting basic template details down. You know, who's related to who, whatever. You still got to go and check their date of birth, their name, and whether they really were married to them. But you can, because it's often wrong, and it really is often wrong. But it is a very good resource for getting your basic bullet points and then going back and checking. And it's and not actually the articles on Wikipedia, it's the footnotes at the bottom, because they link out to people's articles about the topic.
Yes.
So it's always worth looking at a Wikipedia article, but ignoring the article, but looking at the footnotes, because there will always be papers and things listed. Mostly I use, very few actually, I use the British Newspaper Archive, which is not a cheap option really for most people, but it is worth having because it gives you access to all of the newspapers that have been digitized, and we're going back to 1700 odd, you know, back to the beginning of newspapers. You can scroll through them, you can save them. The only one it hasn't got is the Times, because they are old enough, they've got their own archive. They're their own archive and you have to pay for it, so I just do without the Times. But the British Newspaper Archive is amazing. It is literally sort of microfiche version copies of the original papers. So you can scroll through it, you can see the date, you can search for the names, and it's indexed. So you can search it for a name and go through all of the newspapers and mention that name over centuries. It's amazing. The Wellcome collection is surprisingly huge with its information. People tend to think Wellcome is just a sort of museum and a bit of an academic institution, but the Wellcome's got an amazing collection online. Most of if you write non-fiction like I do, most of the Wellcome's images are free to use. You just credit them. They're fine with you using it. And they are full of interesting information. The other one is the British Library. They've got a huge amount online. The British Library are really good because they've microfiched and scanned an awful lot of stuff. And they will also look stuff up for you. If you can get to it, they will find stuff out of their records. Almost all libraries will do that. Liverpool Central Library have been very handy for me in the past, very useful. Most of them, if you ask them first, email them, whatever, will look stuff up. So basically, I tend to try and go for primary sources. So I'll either look through the paperwork, and one of the ancestry sites I use, Find My Past, because you can look up the history of buildings. It's obviously more relevant to non-fiction, but actually it's really handy if you're writing fiction, you want to know what's been somewhere or where people may have lived or whatever. Any of these sort of ancestry genealogy sites are really good because but Find My Past is good because it allows you to look up by address, not just name. But yeah, so basically primary source, but don't trust anything. Try to cross-reference everything, because firstly, the newspapers in the British Newspaper Archive are newspapers. They've been tabloid, scandalous newspapers since the start. You know, they are writing stories. They want people to buy the newspaper. They're not always truthful. They were even more beholden to their political owners years gone by than they are now, you know. So Hansard as well. Hansard is a good one. You can look up Hansard if you want political stuff. So original source, but triangulate it.
Yeah.
And that goes for fiction or non-fiction, because, you know, if you write, going back to something like Rivers of London, that's mentioned in real places. You've got to make sure you've got your history of that place right, unless you're being very clear that you've changed it. Otherwise, you're just going to irritate somebody. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And usually the people that we irritate when we're writing are the ones that have got the loudest voices on social media.
They're the ones that are going to write your reviews, are the ones that know that building was on a different corner, actually.
Yes, or the door was a different colour at that time.
Yeah, it wasn't green in 1780. That didn't happen until 1792. And somebody will know that. So if you're going to specify something, what I would always say is either bullshit or be correct. Be completely bullshitty and say, this is a fiction story based in this place.
Yeah.
Some details have been changed, or you go with something like the Rivers of London, where and actually it's mostly correct, but he does say this isn't a real place. There's an author's note in each one, you know, and he'll say, but he has to know which ones he's got wrong, which ones he's changed. Anyway, it's a nightmare. We know this because we know that the only reviewers are the ones that have found something they can moan about.
Moving back to fiction just for a moment, for you, when you're writing fiction, which comes first? Is it plot or character?
Plot, I would say plot. I've usually got a character in mind that I've got two fictions ongoing at the moment. Actually, I'm going back to fiction for a bit because this is my third history book that's coming out within 2 years. So I'm going back to fiction at the moment. They're two different genres, but with both, I knew what I wanted to happen before I started it. But with both, I had a character. So it's kind of both, but it's generally plot. I know what is like the one of them, because I used to write erotica for a living. That's what I did, and I did it quite successfully. And one of those I'm turning into a full-length book, so it'll end up being a contemporary romance sort of thing. So I know from the start the premise of the story. You know, boy meets girl, this thing happens, what happens next? And then I place it somewhere, because mine, always the place again is the character. And going back to what I said before, of these two works in progress I've got on the go at the moment, one's in London and one's in Liverpool. The London one I've played a bit fast and loose with. You know, she lives on the end of a tube line, and it is anyone that knows the area will know which place it is, but I've changed its name because I've moved buildings and done all that sort of thing. Central London I've made correct because everybody will know it. The Liverpool one, which is an urban fantasy, is correct, and I make sure it's correct because Liverpool is the main character to me in that one. You know, the person's in it, but the city is the character.
I like that. So yeah, it's the pathetic fallacy of the city being the character in the fiction. Yeah,
it is. But yeah, no, I go with plot though, because again, and I go back to what you said at the beginning, I do the same thing every time with both of these stories. I've known from the start with both of them, and one of them has been on the boil in the background for about 10 years now and changed hugely, but I've always known how it started and I've always known how it finished. And in the meantime, it's actually changed to a completely different genre. And everybody else apart from the main character has changed, but it still starts and finishes the same way as I had it to start with.
Yeah.
And so I go back into Scrivener and I have the plot, and Scrivener's good because I can have a little section for each chapter or section, And then you've got another pile of sections underneath where you can put your character notes or your pictures or your photos. It's like a little notebook, you know. So yeah, plot, but I've always got a character in mind, because I probably, unlike most people, I only write in first person.
Right.
So because I can't do it any other way. I mean, those who know me already know I'm autistic, and whether that changes how I see things, I don't know. I can't write fiction unless I can feel myself in the fiction. Do you know what I mean? Because I literally write as if I'm doing it or feeling it or whatever. So it's got to be, it doesn't matter if it's male or female or whatever, but I've got to be able to put myself in that person's head while they're doing it. So I write first person. So I have to have an idea of the character to start with in order to be them.
But yeah, I think it's like, I know lots of writers have said in the past that I know lots of writers are more interested in character than plot, but for me, I'm with you on the plot thing, but it's got to be the character that's right for that particular plot. There's got to
Yes, I think that's exactly it. You've got to have a plot. It's got to be doing something, but the character's got to be there. You know, it's got to fit, hasn't it?
Yeah, if it's the most interesting and exciting character in the world, if they're doing sod all, in that case, it's going to be a really dull read.
Yeah, and in contrast, I've read some books where I haven't been very keen on the characters at all. I haven't thought they're very fleshed out or whatever, but the storyline's been so good. You know, I think if you're going to concentrate on anything, the plot, you do the plot. You've got to, because you can always change the character. You know, you've got to know what you're doing.
I think, I mean, for me personally as well, plotting helps so much, because if you've got a structure that you're actually approaching for a piece of work, in that case, when you sit down to do your work that day, you know exactly where it's going. If you're doing it by the seat of your pants, in that case, for me, it's just a case of, oh, I don't know what I should be doing, or yeah.
Exactly. I would be exactly the same. I would sit here and I would be shitting myself because I don't know where I'm going next with it. So, and then my brain would take over and like, well, what if it doesn't work? What if I can't make it work? Where are they going? I don't know. So I do get that bit, like everyone does. Once you get going, sometimes they run away with you and the characters start doing something you didn't expect, and then you work that into it. But I don't do, I'm always pulling them back to doing roughly, you know, what I'm expecting them to do, because I'm meticulous to the point of I like to have, I know where the pinch points should be and the percentage points of where the things should be. And I do think a lot of people say that's formulaic and it doesn't work. And well, it does bloody work.
Yes.
Because plenty of books have been written and hugely successful where the writer would say they've not done that, but they've accidentally done it. You know, It works because they've landed on those points. They've landed on the marks as they're going, and they know, we all know that it needs to build up, have something happen, middle bit, big crisis, bit of a resolution. Doesn't matter how many ups and downs you put in the middle. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. You look at something like a Jane Austen novel, and we talk about it as being classical literature, but they are formulaic in their structure. And this is not me being dismissive about Jane Austen, because I think some of her work is hilarious and it's really fun to read, but it is written to a formula. It's a formula that's worked for her, and I don't see what's wrong with that. We keep getting told, well, fiction is...
I have to say that I once sat and had lunch with somebody who wrote for Mills and Boon, right. And we met by accident, but she was chatting to me about it because she thought I might like to do it. This is years and years ago now, and I remember being horrified by just how clever you have to be to do it. You know, it's such a difficult thing to do. It has a set template, a set length, a set amount of people that do set things, but they've still got to make it different and interesting every single time. You know, and the work that goes into those is unreal.
That doesn't surprise. It's one of the things that's always been one of my personal ambitions. I always wanted to write a Mills and Boon, just because they always look so successful, and because it would just be such a nice thing to have under my belt. And I think I've tried about 4 or 5 times and got knocked back, because clearly I'm missing out on the formula that they particularly want.
I wouldn't be able to do it. I looked at it again recently, just looking at it thinking, well, is it a formula I could copy? You know, would it work if we just all use that formula? Would that work? It's so restrictive that I couldn't do it in my own stuff at all. But but it is basically the same thing, you know. It's just that they do that all the time. And apparently, I was reading a book by a woman who does a lot of Mills and Boon type, Harlequin type stuff, and it was like a how to write efficiently and, you know, not procrastinate, because we know this is my bête noire. And she's expected to do like 3 or 4 of these a year, and she's just a machine, you know, just sitting there churning and churning and churning. But there is nothing wrong with churning. If you are good at it, there is money to be made in it. It can be enjoyable because you're still making it up.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a huge audience. And this is another thing. I am all for the mainstream. I love weird shit. And some of yours is weird shit, Ash. Let's face it. So, you know, it goes into the weird shit corner, but in a brilliant way. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so many people try for that and fail. At least you know you can do it. A lot of people try that and fail. What a lot more people need to do is just be happy to write for a lot of people. You know, I write history books and I write the way I speak. So if anyone knows me, must think, Jesus Christ, while they're reading. But it's lighthearted and I hope entertaining, because it doesn't have to be dry. These were people, you know, they were people, they did stuff, they had terrible things happen to them, they had brilliant things happen to them. It's an interesting story. It's as gossipy as anything you could see on the telly. So do it mainstream, that's fine. I've had people say, oh, you're too flippant, you know, you don't take it seriously enough, it's too lighthearted. Of course it's supposed to be lighthearted, you're meant to want to read it.
Yeah.
Why would I want to write something that was torture for somebody to read just because it had a lot of long words in it?
One of the things that I was doing with my PhD was making it readable as I worked on it, because it's about short fiction, it's about creative writing. And if I've made something where people are getting bored whilst they're reading it, in that case, I've failed. And yeah, readability is so important.
It's just people are too dismissive, and I don't mean people like students, you know, right, students, because they're there for a reason and they know what they want to do. But I mean, a lot of the general public who would not consider themselves mainstream but think they've got an opinion on this, tend to think that longer words and boring is the way to go. And actually, I've got a friend, Tracy Whitwell, who writes a series called The Accidental Medium. It's coming out with Pan Macmillan next year, and she says it should be like an evening's fun.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, her books are, there's 80,000 words, but I can read one of hers in an evening. I'll read it afternoon, evening, finish it overnight. Because it's fast and it's quick and it's funny and it's lighthearted and it's just it's like eating a great big McDonald's all night. You know, it's great. And I'd rather do that. You know, my spare time's precious. I'd rather sit and read one of Tracy's books than some boring old fart who's used all the words in the world.
Yeah. And yeah, and I've heard people, I've so many times heard people pissing on Mills and Boon books, saying, oh, formulate is all drivel. And you say to them, wow, which ones have you read? And they've never read one.
And they've never read one.
Yeah.
No.
Well, how the fuck do you know that it's fun? Read one and tell me that. And then, yeah, perhaps it's worth listening to you. But yeah, it's just, yeah.
And it's, but also, and as you know, I've had a bit of a rant about this recently anyway, a lot of the things that are seen as mass market or for women, and this is worth writing, you know, creative writing students, bearing in mind, tend to get knocked down. And I know I'm all a bit fuck the patriarchy at all times, you know, we get that, but it's true. It's there for a reason. Romance novels are one of the biggest, if not the biggest selling genres in the world. Mills and Boon is worth a fortune. It is the one that gets ignored all the time. It's not what I write. It's not me. I'm just very defensive over it because I think it gets, I've got several friends who write the sort of novels that you get in Tesco, you know, 2 for £7 or whatever. And they do really, really well out of it. Everyone seems to think lesser of something if it's got a pastel cover and scrolly writing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It doesn't matter. Those people are earning a living. Those people are earning a living writing their books. You know, the rest of you, they're sitting over there sneering and going, oh, well, you know, it's not serious enough and it doesn't touch on the dystopian horrors of the modern world. Brilliant. You're not earning a fortune. Go sit and watch news at 10, you know? Yeah. It's just so easy for everybody to dismiss. And yeah, as you say, one of the biggest markets that's out there. And yeah, one of the ones that's so regularly dismissed. That leads me on to another question, actually. Do you think it's important for writers to engage with marketing? Yes, I do. I don't think you can avoid it, but I don't ever approach it as marketing. I've always, because I'm incapable of doing anything the proper way, I've always just seen it as sort of networking, because I can handle that. I like talking to people. I like social media. I spend too much time on social media, as we know. But I do often use it. But the fact that I spend a lot of time on social media is a good thing as well, because I know a lot of people. I've made a lot of contacts on social media that I would never have had. I wouldn't know you if it wasn't for social media. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's, so I do, but I don't think you can avoid it. I think you've got to do it. But I think see it as networking. Use social media. You do have to curate yourself a little bit, because my first rule is just avoid politics. It isn't worth the grief. Or keep it to your personal Facebook page and don't do it on Twitter or Insta. Just bear in mind that if anything you put online, even if you've posted it privately, you've got to be able to stand up for that at some point if needs be, because somebody might cut and paste it, somebody might screenshot it. Facebook might have a glitch where it just puts everything public one day, you don't know. Don't put anything in writing. Actually, this is a good rule for life anyway. Don't put anything in writing that you wouldn't back up in person, really, truthfully. And use, whether it's social media or going to book fairs or festivals or whatever, talk to people, get to know people, ask them about their stuff. People will talk to you if you ask them about what they're doing, because people like to talk about themselves. So, and make genuine friends of people, and if somebody pops up on Insta and they've got a new book out, just comment on it and say that's really good, because hopefully you mean it anyway. That's brilliant. They've got a book out. That's really cool. You haven't got to go and buy it if you can't afford it, you don't want it. But just engage with everybody, because it does come back, because everything I do has come from connections. I've not gone out. I have not really ever. I've got something going out at the minute that I'm looking for something with, but generally up to this point in time, things have come to me because I've known somebody who knows somebody and they've seen me do something, So Metro, a friend of mine was already writing for them and mentioned my name to them, and they were like, oh yeah, we'll have her, So I started writing for Metro, did 3 years almost full time for Metro, and did everything at the end section, bits and all sorts, went to press screenings, all sorts, because I'm not scared of doing whatever they stick in front of me. Did some horrendous articles for Metro about horrendous soft topics, as you well know, not horrendous, brilliant, but I'd never show them to my mother, involving bizarre sex toys from around the world and things like that, and did it across a national website that had millions of viewers. But from that, my publishers found me. I didn't go looking for them,
Yeah.
They needed somebody, because the Victorians book is part of a series. They did one for each era, and they needed somebody for the Victorians, and they just happened to see that I'd written an article about Victorian sexuality for Metro, and that's where I came from that, So it's all come from speaking to people and making sure people know what I'm interested in. If you want to write about, if you're somebody who wants to write about history, and it's, I don't know, the history of boots, so you've got a history of Dr. Martens, post a lot about them on Instagram or Twitter, or talk about it. People will start noticing what you're doing. If you love frogs, put pictures of frogs. Don't talk about daffodils if what you want to write about is frogs. Do you know what I mean? Because people need to know you're the frog person. You're not the daffodil person. You're the frog boy. So it's that sort of thing. So but in that way, you're marketing yourself as you go along. I've got I do the basics. I've got a website. I long ago stopped writing a blog on it because I never kept it up. So I've got a website that's like a holding page for all of my stuff, and it looks quite nice and it's simple to run. And that's that. And I'm working on doing a mailing list, but because I'll get into trouble if I don't. But other than that, no, it's a case of in case anyone hadn't realized already, very enthusiastic about this stuff. And if I'm enthusiastic about stuff, I don't stop talking about it. But people like it, and the internet is a good thing, because if you go on too long, which I have a tendency to do, as we know, they can switch you off and go away. You're not irritating people so much as in person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you can risk being enthusiastic about your favorite thing and whatever your obsession is, or what you want to write about 12th century monks or whatever. You can do that, because if people don't want to listen, they can walk off. But there might be somebody who's looking for an editor for an anthology about 12th century monks, and now they know that you're interested in it. They wouldn't have known if you hadn't have mentioned it. So yeah, that's my view on marketing, which is probably not the right way of doing it, but I find it manageable.
Sounds sensible to me. I mean, what I did with the last book, the serial killers one, I was reading up an awful lot about serial, to the point where it was getting depressing. You know, you'd sort of like be listening to podcasts at the gym and thinking, these are silly people. But yeah, I would be blogging about it. I would be posting about it. I'd be making silly jokes about it, really bad taste jokes about it. But yeah, and all of it's been working just to let people know that that's what this particular, yeah, that's where my interests have been for the last 3 or 4 months.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm very good at being very sweary about Queen Victoria, because I think she was a right old cow. And now it's a running joke. And, you know, and if somebody wants to ask something about Queen Victoria, I'll quite often get a message asking me, because I'm the person who knows about Queen Victoria, you know. So it works. And you're the person to ask about corpses. So we're all good, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what a speciality I've got there. Yeah. It doesn't help that I used to work for a funeral director, actually. Yeah.
Taking the job home with you.
Yeah, that's why they sacked me. Yeah, Violet, thank you so much. It has been an absolute delight chatting with you this evening. Yeah, I'm sure my students are going to get an awful lot out of this. Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, love.
Thank you.